He mocked his pregnant wife's body in front of everyone, but what she did next brought his entire empire crashing down. A powerful story of betrayal, resilience, and one woman's fight to protect her child, her dignity, and the community he tried to erase. You won't believe how it ends, or who stands beside her in the final scene. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that stay with you long after they're told. The clinking of glasses, soft jazz, and murmured conversations filled the private dining room of the Azure Club, one of Miami's most exclusive rooftop lounges. Clara Whitmore adjusted her seat quietly, conscious of her 7-month pregnant belly pressing uncomfortably against the edge of the table. She had chosen a flowing emerald gown with delicate draping to soften the changes pregnancy had brought to her body, but even the best tailoring couldn't hide the swelling in her ankles or the roundness in her face. She smiled politely at the couple seated across from her, major investors in her husband's newest luxury development project. Her fingers grazed the underside of the table, gently stroking her stomach as the baby stirred. Little movements, like soft flutters, reminded her of the life she was carrying. Derek Whitmore stood just a few feet away, charming as always in his tailored navy suit and gleaming watch. His laugh echoed across the room, deep, polished, and deliberate. He was speaking with Lana Pierce, the new fitness consultant for his real estate empire, and all eyes were on her. Tall, blonde, and toned like a sculpture carved from ambition itself, Lana wore a form-fitting red dress that seemed designed to both announce and command attention. Clara had seen her before, on Instagram, in company marketing shoots, and recently in photos from a wellness branding meeting that Derek had conveniently failed to mention. She'd brushed it off then, telling herself that she was being hormonal or insecure, that a man like Derek, with all his success and influence, naturally surrounded himself with beautiful professionals. But tonight, something shifted. As Derek made his way back to their table, Lana floated beside him, her laughter melodic and just a little too familiar. They reached the table and Derek pulled out Clara's chair, not out of care, but because it gave him a chance to lean in toward Lana, whispering something that made her smile and look away demurely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek said, raising his glass, "to vision, to legacy, and to the pursuit of excellence, no matter what shape it takes." Clara smiled faintly, though the wording landed oddly. She reached for her water and took a long sip, trying to shake the feeling of being the only person in the room wearing discomfort like a second skin. It wasn't until dessert arrived that the dagger truly landed. The conversation had turned light, teasing, and somewhere between mentions of spa amenities and rooftop saunas, one of the investors joked, "Maybe you should include a prenatal yoga studio for women like Clara. She looks like she's ready to pop." Derek chuckled and waved a hand. "She's been doing enough popping at the dinner table, believe me." A beat of silence followed, the kind of silence that clings then crumbles under forced laughter. Clara's throat tightened, her smile faltered, and she lowered her fork. She looked at him, stunned. He didn't look back. He was already pouring wine into Lana's glass, his face the picture of ease, as if his wife's feelings were a non-factor, background noise to a polished performance. Clara felt the humiliation rise like a slow burn across her skin. He had never spoken to her like that in private, let alone in public, not in front of strangers, not in front of her. A hand went instinctively to her stomach, protective and grounding. The baby kicked, hard. She excused herself, smiling politely and blaming the pregnancy. In the restroom, she stared at her reflection under harsh downlights. Her eyes were red, her mascara smudged. She leaned heavily against the marble counter, the weight of what she'd just experienced sinking deeper with each passing second. This wasn't just about her body. This was about erasure, about being replaced. And for the first time, she began to wonder whether Derek had been preparing the world for that eventuality without her even noticing. She dabbed her face with a tissue and inhaled slowly. When she returned to the table, she sat silently while Derek regaled everyone with stories about his first big deal, his passion for architecture, his new plans for holistic living through luxury design. Lana nodded along as if he were a prophet delivering blueprints to paradise. The evening ended with air kisses and backslaps. Derek ushered Clara into the elevator with one hand on her lower back and his phone in the other, still texting as the elevator doors closed. She watched his reflection in the mirrored walls. The man beside her was tall, magnetic, and immaculate, a self-made icon who had once whispered poetry into her collarbone and dreamed aloud about building a legacy with her. Now he was texting someone at 11 p.m., barely offering her a glance. "Did you have fun tonight?" she asked softly, more out of habit than hope. He glanced up from his phone. "What?" "Dinner. The investors. Lana." He smirked. "It was productive. Lana's a pro. You should have seen how impressed Richard was with her ideas." Clara nodded slowly. "She's certainly memorable." He pocketed his phone and gave her a sideways glance. "You're not getting jealous now, are you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fact that he asked that question, instead of acknowledging how he'd embarrassed her, told her everything she needed to know. By the time they arrived home, Clara was too tired to fight. She changed into her nightgown in silence, while Derek took a call downstairs. The voice on the other end, female and laughing, echoed faintly up the staircase. She lay in bed, hands on her belly, watching the ceiling fan rotate in slow, steady spirals. She had traded in her career as an investigative journalist to help build Derek's company. She had walked away from front-page bylines and exposés that shook City Hall to manage charity events and draft speeches on his behalf. She had believed in their mission, believed in him, but what she had seen tonight, what she had felt, was betrayal, not just of their vows, but of her worth. A thought crept into her mind, soft but insistent. "You may have given up your job, Clara, but you haven't lost your instincts." She closed her eyes, but not to sleep. Something had changed tonight. Something inside her had woken up. And it wasn't going back to sleep. The morning after the dinner, the sun spilled across the kitchen island in soft golden rays, but Clara Whitmore barely noticed. She stirred her tea absently, her other hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly. The same curve Derek had mocked in front of strangers just hours earlier. Her body still ached from the tension. Her heart, more so. Derek had left before she woke, a note scribbled in haste on the marble counter. "Early meeting at Pinnacle site. Don't wait up. Big week ahead." He hadn't kissed her forehead, hadn't looked her in the eyes since that humiliating dinner. Clara reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the Instagram icon, a habit she'd broken months ago. But now something pulled her back in. Curiosity, instinct, suspicion. Her feed loaded slowly, and within seconds, there it was. A photo from Tate Luxury Properties. Lana Pierce, dressed in sleek black activewear, standing in the half-finished gym at the Pinnacle high-rise, with the caption, "Thrilled to be working with visionary developer Derek Whitmore on redefining luxury wellness. Big things coming." Clara stared at the screen, her breath caught. That photo was taken yesterday, same day Derek had claimed he was at a site meeting. She scrolled further down the company profile. Every third post featured Lana. Not just professional content, personal moments. Her laughing next to Derek, casually pointing at architectural plans, sipping a smoothie at the very rooftop Clara had once helped design. And then she saw it. A comment from Derek Whitmore, official. "Perfection deserves perfection." Her tea had gone cold, her blood colder. She clicked on Lana's profile. A curated shrine to fitness, femininity, and wealth. Sculpted arms, beach workouts, designer leggings, and buried deep in her story archive, a short video posted around midnight, a flickering candlelit table, a glass of Macallan scotch. Derek's favorite. A caption in cursive font, "Some meetings are better after hours." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a pattern, a message. And it was time to stop pretending it didn't exist. She set her phone down, rubbed her temples, and opened her laptop. Old habits stirred. Her fingers moved with muscle memory, typing the domain for a database she hadn't accessed in nearly 3 years, investigativeregistry.com. Her account was still active. A small comfort. She pulled the files Derek had shared with her months ago about the Pinnacle's budget breakdown. Back then, she hadn't paid much attention. He had waved her off, saying, "It's technical. Trust me, you'll be bored stiff." But now she looked differently. She scrolled line by line looking for gaps, and she found one. A line item marked Wellness Infrastructure Development. Phase 2 had ballooned by nearly $4 million over 3 months. The money had been reallocated from another project. She recognized the original line item immediately: East Side Affordable Housing Initiative. Her project. Clara sat back in her chair, stunned. The affordable housing plan had been her vision, a way to balance Tate's luxury developments with real-world impact. It had been part of the public approval agreement with the city. Derek had promised to protect it, and now he was siphoning money from it to fund a gym, with his mistress as the brand ambassador. The betrayal hit her in layers, as a wife, as a partner, as someone who had trusted him to build something with integrity, and as a woman carrying his child, who was watching the world slowly shift its gaze toward someone thinner, younger, and more on-brand. She felt the baby stir. A soft kick beneath her hand. No, she thought. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about protecting her child's future, her legacy. Later that afternoon, she met with her obstetrician, who furrowed his brow after reading her vitals. "Your blood pressure's elevated," he said, not unkindly. "Have you been under stress?" Clara gave a dry laugh. "You could say that. I want you to take it easy for the next few weeks. No heavy lifting, no stress if you can help it. Maybe take a little time for yourself." She nodded mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She knew exactly what she needed. That evening, as the house fell silent and Derek texted another, "Working late. Don't wait up." Clara slipped into her old study. The room smelled faintly of leather and lemon oil. Her research notebook sat untouched on the top shelf. She pulled one down. It was time to do what she had always done best: connect the dots. She started mapping it out: the timeline of Derek's meetings, the sudden hiring of Lana, the social media crosstags, the funding reallocations, the unexplained terminations of 3 female employees from the company's leadership team, all in the past year. One had left just a month after announcing her pregnancy. A chill ran down Clara's spine. This wasn't just personal betrayal. This was something systemic, a pattern. By midnight, she had a whiteboard covered in color-coded notes, timelines, and potential witnesses. She took a photo and sent it to the only person she still trusted inside Tate Luxury, Noah Green. He responded minutes later. "You're not crazy. I've seen some of this too. Meet tomorrow?" She replied instantly. "Yes, 10 a.m. Rosie's Cafe." And Noah, "Thank you." As she climbed into bed, the baby shifted again. Clara whispered into the quiet, "You're not going to grow up watching your mother stay silent, not when the truth is burning this loud." In the dim room, as the ceiling fan traced slow arcs overhead, Clara Whitmore began writing again. Not just as a betrayed wife, but as an investigative journalist ready to expose what power looked like when it lost its soul. And she would not stop until the world saw it too. At 10 a.m. sharp, Rosie's Cafe buzzed with morning chatter and the comforting smell of strong Cuban coffee. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation filled the air. But Clara only heard the pulse in her ears. She spotted Noah Green in their usual corner booth, his sleeves rolled up, a legal pad already open in front of him, as if he had known this conversation would be serious before she even said a word. He stood when she approached, his eyes scanning her face with concern. "You okay?" he asked gently. Clara gave a tired smile. "Define okay." He didn't press. Instead, he gestured for her to sit and waved to the waitress for 2 coffees. When they were alone again, Clara opened her leather folio and spread out the printed reports she had highlighted the night before. "I need you to look at this," she said, her voice calm but tight. "There's a $4 million discrepancy in the Pinnacle's wellness budget. It came from the East Side Housing Fund." Noah didn't blink. "I know." Clara stared at him. "You knew and didn't say anything?" "I didn't have proof," he said, sighing. "I started seeing weird reallocations 6 weeks ago. When I asked questions, I got vague answers from Derek's CFO. And then, 3 days later, I was pulled from anything related to East Side." Clara leaned in. "Why didn't you come to me?" Noah looked pained. "Because I wasn't sure if you were ready to see what Derek's become." Silence sat between them for a moment. "I am now," Clara said. They talked for an hour. Noah shared what he'd seen from inside, how Derek had fast-tracked Lana's position, moving her from external consultant to unofficial advisor. How confidential memos had started circulating only among select executives. And how 3 senior female employees, each of whom had raised concerns about ethics or workplace discrimination, had quietly left the company. Clara's mind raced. "Do you know where they are now?" Noah nodded. One of them, Jordan Wright, our former financial director, is teaching part-time at FIU. Vanessa Clark's doing nonprofit HR consulting. Alexandra Reyes moved back to Tampa. Clara took notes quickly. I need to talk to all of them. Noah looked at her. Are you planning to go public? I don't know yet, she said, but I do know this. Derek's using city-funded housing money to build a luxury gym wrapped in PR fluff, and he's doing it while parading around his new wellness ambassador like she's the second coming of Jane Fonda. And I am not going to let him bury my work or these women just because they don't fit his perfect image. Noah reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. You were always the one who asked the hard questions. It's time people heard your voice again. Later that day, Clara sat on the back patio of her mother's apartment in Little Havana. The breeze rustled the palm trees outside, and the late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the worn tile floor. Evelyn Carter came out with 2 glasses of lemonade and placed one beside her daughter. You've got that look again, she said. The one you used to get before publishing something big. Clara gave a soft laugh. That obvious? Her mother sat beside her. He doesn't know who he married, does he? Clara shook her head slowly. He thinks I'm tired, distracted, emotional because of the pregnancy. You're emotional because you care, Evelyn said. That's never been a weakness. That's your power. They sat in silence for a while until Clara finally asked, What would you do, Mama, if you knew the man you built a life with was turning into someone you didn't recognize and that he was hurting people? Evelyn didn't hesitate. I'd stop him, no matter what it cost. Clara looked down at her hands, at the way her fingers trembled slightly over the notepad she had brought with her. I need help, she said. Legal, strategic. I need these women to trust me enough to speak, and I need someone on the inside. You already have him, her mother said with a knowing look. That Noah fella, he's been in love with you since you two shared a dorm printer. Clara blinked. Mama. I'm not saying that's the point, Evelyn interrupted. I'm saying he'll protect you. Not because he wants something from you, but because he believes in what you stand for. Clara didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because a part of her, one she hadn't let speak in years, already knew it was true. The next week, Clara spent her days gathering everything she could. She met with Jordan Wright on campus, her baby bump wrapped in a loose blouse that still drew glances from students passing by. Jordan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. You're really going to take him on? I'm not doing it for revenge, Clara said. I'm doing it because this company was supposed to be about integrity, and because he's using money meant for families to fund his mistress's Instagram empire. Jordan handed her a flash drive without a word. Clara clutched it like a lifeline. Vanessa was harder to reach. Her calendar was full, her time divided between nonprofits and consulting work, but Clara showed up anyway, waited at the cafe near her client meeting, and introduced herself without fanfare. I remember you, Vanessa said coolly. You wrote the affordable housing plan. And Derek is tearing it apart, piece by piece, Clara said. Please, I just need your story. Off the record, if that makes you more comfortable. Vanessa exhaled slowly. I don't do half measures anymore. If I talk for real. And then there was Alexandra Reyes. The softest voice, the deepest scars. Clara drove to Tampa and waited outside her yoga class. She looked different now, more relaxed, her face free of the stress that had defined her final months at Tate Luxury. When Clara introduced herself, Alexandra hesitated. Why now? Because he's going to destroy more women if no one stops him. Alexandra looked down at her mat. I wasn't just his assistant, Clara. I knew when meetings were scheduled to hide things. I booked dinners that never made the calendar. I erased voicemails when he asked. Clara felt her stomach tighten. You can help us prove it. Alexandra paused, then nodded. But only if you don't back down. I won't, Clara promised. By the time she returned to Miami, she had witnessed statements, internal emails, copies of financial reports, and enough first-hand testimony to crack the image Derek had spent years perfecting. That night, Noah came over with Thai food and a bottle of sparkling water. Clara sat cross-legged on the couch, her notes spread across the coffee table. This is more than just a story now, she said. It's a movement. Noah looked at her and smiled. You're building something bigger than a headline. Clara looked down at her belly. where her daughter kicked softly in rhythm. "No," she whispered. "I'm building something worth protecting." And that's when the plan began to form. Not a revenge plot, but a calculated act of truth. She wouldn't expose him in the tabloids. She wouldn't scream in private. She would wait until the one night he couldn't afford to be exposed, the Tate Luxury Annual Gala, where the spotlight would be his until she took it back. The night of the Tate Luxury Annual Gala arrived cloaked in Miami opulence. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom shimmered under a cascade of chandeliers, each casting a golden glow on the perfectly tailored suits and glittering gowns of the city's elite. Waiters floated through the crowd with trays of champagne and caviar, and at the center of it all stood a massive ice sculpture of the pinnacle, slowly melting under the weight of symbolism no one yet understood. Clara Whitmore stepped out of the black car, her heels clicking purposefully against the stone driveway. Her gown, midnight blue silk, custom-tailored to hug her 7-month pregnancy, flowed like water. The sweetheart neckline and low, open back were daring, elegant, and intentional. A small diamond pin, a gift from her late father, fastened her shawl. Her hair was swept up, her makeup soft but fierce. She paused at the entrance of the ballroom. The room hushed, just slightly. Heads turned. Conversations stuttered. For months, the whispers had floated. "Clara's not well. She's been staying home. She won't show. She's fading." And now, here she was, glowing, poised, and unmistakably present. At her side, Noah Green offered his arm. Dressed in a deep charcoal tuxedo, he looked every bit the co-founder and ethics director he once was, until Derek sidelined him. His expression was calm, but Clara could feel the tension in his arm. He knew what was coming. He had helped her plan every piece of it. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked under his breath. Clara didn't flinch. "I've never been more ready." As they walked through the crowd, Clara heard the whispers trail behind them. "That's Clara? She looks incredible. Did you hear about the East Side project? I thought it was canceled." At the far end of the ballroom, standing under a towering floral arrangement and surrounded by investors, was Derek Whitmore. He looked sharp in his tuxedo, his smile polished, his posture imperial. At his side, like a red exclamation point, stood Lana Pierce. Her dress clung to her like liquid flame, high-slit, backless, daring. She laughed, tossed her hair, whispered something into Derek's ear. He smirked. Then his eyes caught Clara's, and for a split second, the mask cracked. It was small, a flicker in the jaw, a slight tightening of his hand around the stem of his glass. But Clara saw it. Noah saw it too. Derek quickly recovered, excusing himself from the circle. Lana followed, glancing over her shoulder with a tight smile that barely reached her eyes. As Clara moved through the room, she was greeted with a flurry of half-sincere well-wishes and wide-eyed compliments. But the real players, donors, city officials, foundation heads, were watching carefully, sensing that the energy in the room had changed. Something was about to happen. Helen Baxter, head of the gala committee, greeted her with a brittle smile. "Clara, we've missed you at the meetings." "I've been working on other things," Clara replied with smooth warmth. "But I wouldn't miss tonight. The East Side Initiative means too much." Helen blinked. "Oh, I thought there were adjustments to that program?" Clara didn't miss a beat. "You should ask Derek about that." Behind her, Noah murmured, "She knows. They've been briefed." Clara nodded once. "Let's finish this." Moments later, a hush spread through the ballroom. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage at the front of the room where Derek stepped up to the podium. His face beamed with confidence, charisma quilled tight behind his smile. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Tonight, we gathered to celebrate not just a company, but a vision. A vision for luxury, for innovation, and for community growth that lifts us all." Clara watched from the edge of the room, Noah at her side. In her clutch purse was a drive containing hours of interviews, screenshots, emails, and documents. Truth, compressed into 16 gigabytes of digital fire. Derek continued, "Our East Side redevelopment initiative was just the beginning. And now, as we pivot toward holistic living, we introduce a new model, wellness-focused urban development that promotes not just where people live, but how they live." Behind him, the screen lit up with renderings of sleek spas, yoga decks, infinity pools, all under the brand of Pinnacle Wellness. And standing in the mock-ups, in tight activewear and soft filtered light, was Lana Pierce. "Tonight," Derek said, I'm honored to officially announce Miss Pierce as our Director of Wellness Development." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Lana waved from the VIP section, her expression poised and victorious. Clara stepped forward. Her heels echoed across the ballroom as she crossed to the stage. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Even Derek stopped mid-sentence, blinking as his wife ascended beside him. "Clara," he said into the mic, voice tight, "would you like to say something?" She smiled gently and took the mic from his hand. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear, strong. "I'm Clara Whitmore. Many of you know me as Derek's wife. But before that, I was a journalist. Before that, I was the co-architect of the East Side Housing Initiative." The room shifted. It was almost physical, the way the energy recalibrated. "Tonight, I want to talk about integrity," Clara continued. "About promises made. About public money meant for affordable housing being funneled into wellness centers with 5-figure memberships." Gasps rippled. Derek stepped closer. "Clara." But she held up her hand. "In your gala packets tonight, you'll find documentation," she said calmly. "Emails, contracts, records of internal reallocations, testimonies from former employees who were silenced, intimidated, or pushed out when they spoke up." The screen behind them flickered again, this time showing a graphic. $4.3 million diverted from public housing to luxury amenities. Then a slideshow began, a series of emails between Derek and Lana. Professional, but intimate. Carefully worded, but revealing. Clara didn't flinch. "I also have evidence of personal misconduct and conflict of interest, because when you use a company to build your mistress's brand, when you erase a public good to create a private indulgence, you stop being a leader." The silence was thunderous. Derek reached for the mic, but Noah had joined her on stage, handing her a legal letter. "This," Clara said, raising it, "is a formal request for Derek Whitmore to step down pending investigation." Security began moving toward the stage. Bravely, Lana stood up, but the cameras had already turned on her. She froze in the blinding lights. Derek looked between his wife, the audience, and the unraveling spectacle. Clara turned one final time to the crowd. "This company was built on the idea of lifting people up, and tonight I'm lifting the truth into the light." She walked off the stage to stunned silence. And then, applause. Not polite, not performative, real, raw, relieved. Outside, as the Miami air wrapped around her like silk, Clara exhaled for the first time in months. "Are you okay?" Noah asked softly. Clara looked toward the stars, then down at her belly. "She kicked right when I finished," she whispered. "Smart girl," he said. "No," Clara smiled. "Strong girl." And as they stood beneath the night sky, she knew the hardest part wasn't over, but it had finally begun. The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Miami Convention Center, warming the polished floors and casting golden light on the glossy banners that hung proudly above the stage. Tate Luxury Properties, redefining community. Rows of seats filled quickly as journalists, investors, and city officials took their places. The press conference was meant to be the crowning moment of Derek Whitmore's career, his grand unveiling of the pinnacle wellness vision, the supposed evolution of urban living. And Derek looked the part. He arrived in a tailored charcoal suit, every detail impeccable, tie knotted just right, pocket square crisp, smile polished and powerful. As his PR director handed him the final talking points, he surveyed the room like a general before battle. Lana Pierce was already seated in the front row, her posture regal, her fitted white blazer reflecting the lights from the media setup. She gave Derek a private smile, the kind that said, "This is our moment." "Everything's in place," his assistant whispered. "Of course it is," Derek replied smoothly. He had no idea what was coming. At exactly 10 a.m., he stepped onto the stage to polite applause. Cameras flashed. Screens lit up behind him, displaying glossy renderings of rooftop spas, organic juice bars, and glass-walled meditation chambers. It was everything the luxury market craved. And Derek delivered his speech with the precision of a man used to commanding rooms. But halfway through, as he spoke about reinvesting in communities through forward-thinking wellness architecture, the double doors at the back of the hall opened quietly. Most didn't notice at first, but then Clara walked in. She wore a sleek navy maternity suit that framed her pregnant form with grace and power. Her heels clicked softly against the tile, and beside her walked Noah Green, stone-faced and calm. Following them were three women, Jordan Wright, Vanessa Clark, and Alexandra Reyes. Each dressed with quiet dignity. Each had once worked inside Tate Luxury, and each carried the truth in folders tucked under their arms. The murmurs began like a soft wave. Reporters turned. Photographers aimed their cameras, and Derek faltered for a split second at the podium. His jaw tensed, his eyes narrowing. He hadn't expected her to come. Clara didn't stop. She walked with purpose down the center aisle, the room parting before her like water. Lana's face twitched. Her smile vanished. Derek cleared his throat. As I was saying, our commitment to innovation extends to community development. Excuse me, a voice called out. Jordan Wright had stood. The room turned. Derek's PR director stepped forward. We'll take questions after the presentation. Jordan didn't sit. This is my question. Can you explain why $12 million originally designated for affordable housing construction has been redirected to luxury wellness facilities in the Pinnacle development? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Derek's smile stiffened. That's a mischaracterization. We've optimized our strategy to reflect the evolving needs of the community. Needs that require $250,000 memberships? Vanessa Clark stood now. Or just needs that match Mistress Pierce's aesthetic? Cameras whipped toward Lana, who sat frozen, blinking under the harsh lights. Clara and Noah reached the stage. Derek tried to intercept them, stepping slightly in front. Clara, this isn't the time. She didn't look at him. Good morning, she said clearly, taking the podium with poise. I'm Clara Whitmore, co-founder of the East Side Initiative and former investigative journalist. Today I stand not just as Derek's wife, but as a whistleblower. The silence in the room turned electric. We are distributing documentation now, Clara continued, as Noah gave a signal. Staff began passing out folders row by row, copies of financial documents, internal memos, emails, and screenshots. These materials show systematic financial misappropriation, unethical reallocation of city-designated funds, and discriminatory practices against women in leadership, especially those who became pregnant. Derek's face reddened. This is outrageous. Alexandra Reyes stepped forward. I was asked to backdate documents and hide private meetings off the record. Many of those meetings were with Miss Pierce. This is a coordinated attack, Derek said sharply. These are disgruntled ex-employees. No, Clara replied, her voice even. These are women who were silenced, until now. A journalist from the Miami Herald stood. Mrs. Whitmore, are you saying your husband used public funds to develop private wellness properties for personal benefit? Yes, Clara said without hesitation. And we have the records to prove it. Another reporter chimed in. Miss Pierce, do you deny a personal relationship with Mr. Whitmore? Lana finally stood, her composure cracking. This is a professional collaboration. Noah stepped forward. Then perhaps you can explain these text messages. The screen behind the stage shifted. Projected for all to see were several messages between Derek and Lana. Need to move 2M from East Side line item. Find a way to label it community health. Got it. Let's spin it as urban resilience. Smart. Dinner later? Yours. Always. The room erupted. Reporters shouted. Phones rang. Lana sat down slowly, her face pale. Derek stepped to the mic, his voice trembling with controlled fury. My wife is clearly emotional. She's near the end of her pregnancy and... Actually, Jordan Wright interrupted, as the former financial director who was terminated after questioning these reallocations, I can confirm every figure. And as the former HR lead, Vanessa added, I confirm multiple discrimination settlements, buried through NDAs. Clara turned back to the room. I also want to announce, she said, that Tate Luxury Properties will undergo a full ethical review, led by a new committee, effective immediately. Mr. Whitmore will be taking a leave of absence while investigations proceed. You don't have that authority, Derek barked. Noah stepped forward, calmly placing a document on the podium. Actually, per the moral conduct clause Derek signed, and with the board's emergency approval, voting control of his shares has been temporarily suspended. Derek stared at the paper. It bore Clara's signature. He looked up at her, betrayal flashing in his eyes. You planned this. Clara didn't blink. No. You planned this the moment you chose power and image over integrity and family. The press conference descended into chaos as security escorted Lana out through a side exit, and reporters shouted for statements. Derek stood in the middle of the stage, surrounded by bright lights and accusations, his perfect world shattering one camera flash at a time. In the green room afterward, Clara sat quietly, one hand on her belly, the other holding a bottle of water. Noah sat beside her, eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like that." She looked at him, tired but resolute. "That was just part one." He raised an eyebrow. "There's more?" She nodded. "Always is, but this time I'm the one writing the ending." Outside, reporters continued to swarm, but inside, Clara Whitmore finally exhaled. Not just because the truth was out, but because, for the first time in a very long time, she was free. The fallout came fast, like a Miami thunderstorm, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. Within hours of the press conference, the headlines were everywhere. Luxury mogul exposed by pregnant wife in stunning public takedown. Millions diverted from housing project, investigation underway. Wellness scandal rocks Tate properties. By sundown, Derek Whitmore's empire was no longer the shining beacon of modern development. It was a crime scene dressed in high-end branding. The SEC launched a formal investigation into financial misconduct. The city of Miami suspended all pending permits for Tate luxury properties. Investors pulled out. Sponsors vanished. And Lana Pierce? She disappeared from social media entirely, wiping her Instagram clean and releasing a vague statement about needing time to focus on healing. Meanwhile, Clara Whitmore sat in her quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound as she sipped peppermint tea and scrolled through the chaos on her phone. Her belly was heavy now. The baby would come soon. But Clara felt lighter than she had in years. She wasn't surprised when Derek didn't come home that night. Or the next. He had gone radio silent, his team too scattered to mount any defense, his lawyers busy untangling the implications of the evidence Clara and her allies had handed over. She didn't miss him. She missed who she thought he used to be. And that was a very different thing. 3 days after the press conference, Clara stood before a wide window in the nursery that had once been just a storage room. The soft pinks and creams of the decor glowed in the late afternoon light. She placed a folded onesie in the dresser drawer, then stood still, both hands resting on the gentle curve of her stomach. She whispered to her daughter, a vow she knew she would keep. "You won't grow up watching your mother shrink herself for someone else's comfort." The doorbell rang. It was Noah. He stood on the porch holding a cardboard box and an envelope tucked under his arm. "Bad news?" Clara asked, opening the door. "Not quite," he said, "but you should sit down." They moved to the living room. Clara lowered herself onto the couch, wincing slightly as her baby shifted again. Noah placed the box on the coffee table and opened the envelope. Inside was a letterhead stamped with the words Whitmore Community Holdings, Internal Review Board. "They voted," he said, meeting her eyes. "They're renaming the company." Clara raised her brows. "It's no longer Tate Luxury Properties," Noah continued. "It's now Whitmore Community Development." She blinked. "I didn't expect them to do that." "You earned it. You saved them." He slid a thick document toward her, legal paperwork confirming her appointment as interim CEO, effective immediately. Clara stared at it. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then quietly, "I spent so long thinking I was just someone's wife." Noah smiled softly. "You were always more than that. Everyone can see it now." Clara leafed through the paperwork, the responsibilities, the clauses, the liabilities. It wasn't glamorous. It was real, tangible, and it had meaning. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "We're all sure," Noah said. "Vanessa, Jordan, even the city board, they trust you." Clara exhaled slowly. "Then let's do it right this time." Over the next few weeks, while the media storm continued to rage around Derek, Clara got to work. From her living room, propped up with pillows and her laptop balanced on her knees, she met daily with teams. City officials, community reps, architects, and former employees who now saw her as a lighthouse in the wreckage. She reinstated the East Side Affordable Housing Project in full. She canceled the wellness center contracts and diverted the funds back to their original purpose. And she personally called every displaced employee who had signed an NDA under duress. Some were hesitant, others were relieved. All were grateful. Meanwhile, Derek fought from the sidelines. His legal team issued denials. He called in favors. He tried to spin the narrative, but the tide had turned. The board had unanimously voted to suspend his authority. The SEC findings were damning, especially after Lana's bank records showed a series of deposits aligned with project withdrawals. There was talk of criminal charges, but Clara, despite everything, pushed back against the harsher outcomes. She didn't want revenge. She wanted change. She wanted her daughter to grow up in a world where women didn't have to burn everything down just to be heard. One evening, Clara sat on the back porch of her mother's apartment in Little Havana. The air was warm and thick with the scent of gardenias. Evelyn brought her a plate of arroz con pollo, fussing even though Clara could barely eat. "Every time I look at the news," Evelyn said, settling beside her, "I see your face." "Is that a complaint?" Clara teased, resting one hand on her belly. "It's pride," her mother said. "It's the look you had when you were 12 and marched into the principal's office to expose the lunchroom rat problem." Clara laughed. "Some things never change." Evelyn reached out and gently brushed Clara's hair back. "You gave up everything for that man, but you found yourself again." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think I could." "But you did," Evelyn whispered, "and you did it with grace." The next morning, Clara went into labor. Noah rushed her to the hospital, speeding through Biscayne traffic with white knuckles and a calm voice that barely concealed his fear. Hours later, under soft hospital lights, Clara gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Isabel Grace Whitmore. She had Clara's dark curls and, surprisingly, Derek's blue eyes. But her little fists curled tight like she was ready to fight the world, and Clara knew in that moment Isabel had inherited the fire too. Derek wasn't there. He had only found out about Isabel's birth through his attorney. He sent flowers. Clara didn't keep them. She didn't need grand gestures anymore. She had the truth. And she had a future. 2 weeks later, as Isabel slept in a bassinet beside her desk, Clara dialed into a video meeting with city planners. Behind her hung a new rendering of the East Side development. Parks, affordable homes, community clinics, real spaces, real lives changed. "Let's build," she said simply, and the room nodded. That night, after feeding Isabel and rocking her gently to sleep, Clara stood by the nursery window once again. She looked out over the city, the same skyline Derek once thought he owned. Now it was hers. Not to possess, but to serve. Because Clara Whitmore hadn't just taken back her power, she had rebuilt it. Brick by brick, truth by truth. And the best part? She was just getting started. 3 months after Isabel's birth, the offices of Whitmore Community Development had transformed from a symbol of scandal into a headquarters of hope. Gone were the cold minimalist designs and sterile white walls Derek once favored. In their place, Clara had commissioned warm earth tones, soft lighting, reclaimed wood tables, and framed photos of community members from the East Side Initiative. Smiling, working, rebuilding. The new space didn't just look different. It felt different. Clara walked through the corridor with Isabel nestled in a sling across her chest, her tiny hand peeking out against the soft cotton wrap. Staff members waved gently or smiled without interrupting. Clara still wasn't back full-time. Motherhood had its own demanding rhythm, but she made it a point to show up at least twice a week. Not to oversee, not to hover, but to lead. She stepped into the small conference room just as Noah Green was finishing up a call. He stood when he saw her, offering that familiar smile that now came with a quiet warmth neither of them had dared name. "You're early," he said. "She napped all morning," Clara replied, easing into the chair beside him, "which means I'm living on borrowed time." Noah laughed, glancing down at Isabel. "She's got your focus." Clara brushed a finger along her daughter's cheek. "And her father's eyes," she murmured. There was a pause, not heavy, but thoughtful. "You've handled that with more grace than I ever could," Noah said finally. Clara exhaled. "There are days I still feel angry, but then I remember. Anger is part of grief. I'm not grieving the man he became. I'm grieving the man I thought he was." Noah nodded slowly. "What about forgiveness?" She tilted her head. "Forgiveness is earned. He's got a long road." Noah didn't push further. He knew where the limits were, and he honored them. Clara pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "I want to expand the integrated housing model," she said. "Not just East Side. I'm thinking West Corridor next. We pair mixed-income housing with micro-business grants. Target single mothers, working families, anyone trying to escape the paycheck-to-paycheck trap." Noah leaned in, intrigued. "You've already mapped this out?" "Of course I have. Clara replied, smirking. I think in grids now. He looked at her, admiration in his eyes. You realize you're rewriting the playbook. I'm rewriting my own, she said. The rest is just a bonus. Outside the office, news of Clara's leadership had begun to shift public perception. What had once been a scandal was now a case study in ethical recovery. Forbes ran a piece titled From Scandal to Solution: How Clara Whitmore is Rebuilding the City with Integrity. Business schools asked for guest lectures, nonprofit organizations offered partnerships, but Clara chose her engagements carefully, always weighing the mission against the spotlight. She didn't want fame, she wanted impact. On weekends, she and Evelyn, her mother, walked Isabel through the East Side Gardens, where families were now moving into homes they never thought they could afford. The buildings were modest but beautiful. Wide porches, solar panels, courtyards where children played in the afternoon sun. Community kitchens offered hot meals. A tiny library hosted reading circles. It wasn't luxury, but it was dignity. Do you remember the night of the gala? Evelyn asked one Sunday afternoon, watching a young girl ride her bicycle along the sidewalk. Clara nodded. Every second of it. I never told you this, but when you walked into that ballroom, I felt your father there. I know it sounds foolish. It doesn't, Clara whispered. He would have been so proud of you, Evelyn said. Not just for what you did, but how you did it. Clara swallowed a lump in her throat. She hadn't done it alone. That truth stayed with her. It was why she made space for every voice now. Not just the loudest, not just the most credentialed, but those who had been ignored the longest. Women, mothers, survivors, like Vanessa Clark, who now led their HR department with a zero-tolerance policy on discrimination and an open-door mentorship program, like Jordan Wright, who returned as head of finance and implemented a transparency dashboard the public could access in real time, like Alexandra Reyes, who rebuilt their internal scheduling system to prevent any executive from burying meetings again. Each woman had once been a footnote in Derek's version of the story. Now they were writing new chapters. One evening, Clara found herself alone in her home office, Isabel asleep in her crib and the city hushed under twilight. She opened a folder labeled Future Projects. It was filled with ideas from community members, some polished, some scribbled on napkins. One stood out. It read, Build something worth staying for. Clara ran her fingers over the phrase. That had always been her dream, hadn't it? Not just buildings, not just policy, but belonging. A gentle knock broke her reverie. She turned. It was Noah, holding 2 cups of chamomile tea. I figured you were still awake, he said, stepping inside. You tend to overwork when things are calm. Guilty, she smiled, accepting the cup. He settled onto the couch beside her, his presence grounding the sea, unspoken but undeniable. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked softly. For the company? For us? He was quiet for a long moment. I think about it more than I should, he admitted. But I also know healing doesn't follow a schedule. Clara nodded. I don't want to rush something just because it feels convenient. It doesn't feel convenient, Noah said. It feels honest. She looked at him then. Really looked. The man who had stood beside her when everyone else scattered. The friend who had never asked for more but always given it. The partner who saw all of her and never flinched. I'm not ready, she said. I know, he replied. But I'd like you to stay. His smile deepened. Then, I'm already home. And as the night wrapped around them like a quiet promise, Clara leaned back into the cushions, her daughter safe in the next room, her city rebuilding just beyond the glass, and her heart, at last, beginning to believe in something new. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living and leading and learning to love on her terms in her time. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was better. The sun cast a warm amber glow over the freshly painted buildings of the East Side Community Development. Where once there had been vacant lots and crumbling infrastructure, now there were tidy homes with flower boxes, solar-paneled rooftops, and laughter echoing from shared courtyards. Children raced their bikes along safe, clean sidewalks. Murals painted by local artists adorned the walls, one of which depicted a woman holding a child high above a skyline, her eyes turned toward the future. Clara Whitmore stood on a small stage in the center of the community garden, a pair of oversized scissors in her hand, her 3-year-old daughter Isabel bouncing excitedly beside her. She was dressed in a pale yellow sundress that fluttered in the breeze, her curls tied in a satin bow. Clara leaned down, whispering into her daughter's ear, and together they cut the bright red ribbon stretched across the new community center entrance. Applause erupted around them. Clara smiled, blinking back tears as the crowd rose to their feet. City leaders, volunteers, families, donors, former staffers turned allies. For a long moment, she simply stood there, taking it all in. "Thank you," she said into the microphone once the cheers had faded. "This isn't just the opening of a building. It's the continuation of a promise. A promise that no neighborhood should be left behind, that no child should grow up thinking they don't matter, that no woman should be silenced when she speaks up for what's right." The wind picked up slightly, carrying her words through the crowd. "When I first walked into a meeting with plans for this neighborhood," she continued, "I was told it wasn't viable, that there was no return on investment, but I wasn't looking for profit. I was looking for purpose. And thanks to so many of you standing here today, we've created something that goes beyond metrics and margins. We've built a place where families can thrive, where communities can take root and grow." She paused as Isabel tugged at her hand. "I helped cut it, Mommy," the little girl declared proudly into the mic, prompting a ripple of affectionate laughter. Clara knelt and kissed her cheek. "Yes, you did, sweetheart. You cut it perfectly." From the back of the crowd, a figure watched in silence. Derek Whitmore had changed. His once perfectly styled hair was now streaked with gray at the temples, his frame thinner, his presence quieter. He stood by the edge of a shady tree, wearing a simple blazer and open-collar shirt. No cameras, no entourage. Just a man watching the life he once tried to shape on his own terms now flourish without him. He stayed hidden until the crowd dispersed, until Clara had handed Isabel off to her mother and began mingling with the local families. When she turned and spotted him, their eyes met across the garden, and for a moment, everything stopped. He approached slowly, cautiously. Clara didn't move away. "Congratulations," he said simply. "It's everything you said it would be." Clara studied him, really studied him for the first time in years. The sharpness in his eyes had softened. The arrogance was gone. What remained was something more complicated. Human, wounded, quietly humbled. "Thank you for coming," she replied, surprising them both. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Wasn't sure I deserved to be here." She tilted her head. "What changed your mind?" "I wanted to see it with my own eyes. What we were supposed to build, what you built." There was no bitterness in his voice, only truth. She nodded once. "It's open to everyone. That includes you." They stood there in silence, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and children playing. For a man who once built towers to his own ego, it was humbling to see how much more power existed in simple things. A community garden, a shared meal, a clean, safe place to call home. "How are you?" Clara asked finally. "Changing," he said. "Slower than I should have, but it's happening." Clara looked down for a moment. "You know, I could have pressed charges, pushed harder." "I know," he said. "I've thought about that every day." "Why do you think I didn't?" she asked, not with accusation, but curiosity. Derek swallowed. "Because you're better than me." Clara shook her head. "No, because I didn't want Isabel growing up with a father behind bars. I wanted her to have a chance to know you, if you ever became someone worth knowing." He nodded. "I'm trying to be." They stood in silence again until Clara added, "She knows who you are. We talk about you. I read her the books you send." His expression softened, eyes misting. "Does she ask questions?" "All the time," he exhaled. "And what do you say?" "I tell her. Her father made mistakes, but he's learning from them, and that takes courage." A long pause settled between them before he said, quietly, "Would it be okay if I spoke to her for a moment?" Clara hesitated, then looked toward the playground where Isabel ran barefoot through the grass, shrieking with delight as Noah lifted her into the air and spun her. "She's with someone who's been there since the beginning," Clara said, her voice low. "He's not trying to replace you, but he's earned her trust, and mine." "I can see that," Derek said, nodding slowly. "He's good with her." "He's good for both of us," she replied honestly. Derek took a shaky breath. "Then I'm grateful." Clara glanced at him again. "Come to her birthday party next month, for just family and close friends, if you're ready." He looked stunned for a moment. "You'd let me?" "It's not about what I let you do. she said. It's about what she deserves, and she deserves to have the option to know you. Derek looked down, blinking quickly. Thank you. Don't thank me, she replied. Just be someone worth showing up as. He offered a small, grateful nod before backing away into the crowd. Clara watched him disappear among the people, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with clarity. The chapter was closed, not erased, but acknowledged. She turned back to Noah and Isabel, watching the way her daughter beamed as he handed her a paper crown and bowed dramatically as if knighting her. This was her life now, not a return to what had been, but a blooming of what could be. It was steady, quiet, real. Later that evening, after the chairs were stacked and the streamers pulled down, Clara walked alone through the garden, her heels in her hand, the soil cool beneath her bare feet. The stars shimmered above her like witnesses. She looked up and whispered, "We did it, baby girl." And deep within the breeze, carried through leaves and laughter, she felt her daughter's future whisper back, "You did more than survive, Mommy. You built something that will outlive us all." Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Clara's journey. If you're still here, it means something in this story touched your heart, and that means the world to us. This wasn't just a story about betrayal or redemption. It was about courage, the kind that rises quietly when the world expects you to shrink. Clara's story reminds us that even when life crumbles around us, we still have the power to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more honest. True strength isn't about never falling, it's about choosing to rise with purpose. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We always enjoy seeing our community from around the world come together. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We share real, emotional, and powerful stories every week, and we promise they only get better from here. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never be afraid to rewrite your own story.